Hello and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. My name is Bhante Suddhāso, and this evening we'll be looking at another discourse of the Buddha. So I'll start with homage to the Buddha, and then I'll read through the discourse and give some comments. And then if there's any questions, I'll answer questions at the end, so feel free to type in questions at any time. So I'll start with homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So the discourse for today is from the Anguttara Nikaya, the numerical discourses of the Buddha, chapter number 9, Sutta 14, the Samiddhisutta. So this was a sutta that someone had previously requested. So I'll start with reading through the discourse. So the discourse begins. And I'm reading here from Bhante Suddhāso's translation, but I'll also be adjusting the translation as I go along and also making some comments about the Pali terms being used. So the discourse begins. Then Venerable Samiddhi went up to Venerable Sāriputta, bowed and sat to one side. So this is already somewhat interesting in that this is one of the few discourses which does not, in which the teaching is not given from the Buddha. And in fact, the Buddha isn't involved in this discourse. It's a conversation between these two monks. So we have Venerable Sāriputta, who of course is one of the foremost disciples of the Buddha. And then we have Venerable Samiddhi, who's a much less significant character in the Pali Canon, only appears in a handful of places. So Venerable Samiddhi goes to Venerable Sāriputta, bows and sits to one side. And then Venerable Sāriputta starts asking him a series of questions. And this is one of the ways that people would bring out a Dhamma talk, is rather than just talking, instead they would ask a series of questions in order to get another monk to explain the Dhamma. So Venerable Sāriputta says, Samiddhi, based on what do thoughts arise in a person? And this is already interesting the way it's starting off here. So in Pali, this is King Aramana Purisasa Sankappa Vitaka Upajanti. So based on what aramana? So aramana is a sense object, something that one becomes aware of. Or something that is the basis of an experience. So based on what experience, or based upon what object, or based upon what coming within one's field of sensation, do sankappa and vitaka arise. So vitaka means thought, and usually when we encounter the word vitaka, it has just the ordinary meaning of discursive thinking. Or more well-formed thoughts in the mind. And sankappa is a bit more specific. So sankappa you might recognize from the Noble Eightfold Path. The second part of the Noble Eightfold Path is samma sankappo. So the word sankappa then means one's attitude or one's intention. Sankappa literally means preparation. So how one's mind is prepared to deal with a situation. This is the literal meaning of sankappa. So sankappa then means attitude, or one's mind frame, the way that one is approaching a situation, or the way one is prepared to approach a situation. So samma sankappa then is defined as the attitude of renunciation. So preparing the mind to respond with renunciation to any situation. The attitude of harmlessness, preparing the mind to always default towards harmlessness, towards not causing harm. So the Buddha's, Sāriputta here is asking Samiddhi to explain what is the basis for which attitudes and thoughts arise in the mind. And Samiddhi replies, based on nama and rupa. So nama means mind, and rupa means body. So in the translation here, this is translated as name and form, which is literally accurate, but not the meaning of these words. So nama rupa in the Pali Canon is often used to simply mean mind and body. And in fact, when the Buddha defines the word nama, he lists a series of mental components, different aspects of mind, such as sense contact and volition. And then rupa is defined as one's physical body, one's physical experience. So then nama and rupa is mind and body. And so translating it as name and form is problematic because the word nama, in other contexts, it does have the meaning of name. For example, if you ask someone what their name is, you would say, Kin namosi, what is your nama? So it does have that meaning. But when it's used in the phrase nama rupa, nama means mind, your mental components of being, whereas rupa means your physical components of being, your body. So nama rupa means mind and body. So it is mistranslated here as name and form, but it means mind and body. So it's saying, so once again, he's asking, based on what object or based on what sensory experience do attitudes and thoughts appear in the mind? And Samiddhi replies, based upon mind and body. So when one is aware of mind and body, then attitudes and thoughts arise. And Sāriputta then asks, where do they become diversified? And so in Pali, this is te panikwa nanatang gachanti. Literally means, where do they go to diversity, or where do they go to variation? So in other words, he's asking, so these attitudes and thoughts arise in the mind, so how do they divide or manifest into a wide variety of different shapes and forms? So how do all these attitudes and thoughts then turn into a bunch of different things in the mind? How does that spread out and disperse and create this whole complex thought world that we live in? And Samiddhi replies, in the elements. So this is, in Pali, it's dhatu. And this is actually not a very helpful answer because the word dhatu has a wide range of meanings in Pali. And it also encompasses a wide range of things. So the word dhatu can be translated simply as element, or component or aspect. And in the thought world of the Pali Canon, a dhatu is a basic building block of reality. So it's one of the fundamental components of our experience is called a dhatu. And the term dhatu then is used for different things. One of the things the term dhatu is used for is for our senses. So the dhatu of vision, or the dhatu of hearing, the dhatu of smell. So each of the six senses then is a dhatu. It's a fundamental building block of our experience. Dhatu is also used to refer to the six aspects of reality, the six aspects of our experience, which are divided into 5 physical and 1 mental. So the earth dhatu, Patavi dhatu, which represents our experience of solidity, the water dhatu, apo dhatu, which is our experience of fluidity or liquidity, the fire dhatu, tejo, which is our experience of heat, of temperature, vayu dhatu, which is our experience of motion, of air, distension, expansion, contraction, and the akasa dhatu, which is the experience of space. So these are the 5 physical elements, which are just ways of describing the 5 different tones of physical experience, the 5 different kinds of physical sensations. And then the 6th dhatu is vijnana dhatu, which is the consciousness element. So this is the 6th aspect of our experience, the 6th foundational building block of our experience, which is the domain of mind, the field of mind. So this is a way of talking about elements. Another way that the Buddha spoke about elements, which is very useful, is he said that there are 2 dhatus. There is the sankata dhatu and the asankata dhatu. So the sankata dhatu is the conditioned element or the constructed element. So that element of reality which is made up of discrete objects, discrete things, discrete phenomena, each of which is constructed of specific characteristics. So for example, a glass of water has a number of definable characteristics. Therefore, it is a sankata dhatu. It's something which is made up of definable characteristics. It's a distinct object with definable characteristics. And the opposite is the asankata dhatu, the unconstructed element, the element of the unconditioned, the element of that which is not made up of discrete objects, which does not have definable characteristics. And the asankata dhatu is nibbana, also called the nibbana dhatu. So then we have 2 dhatus. So we have the asankata dhatu, which is everything that's not nibbana, and we have the sankata dhatu, which is nibbana, the nibbana dhatu. So this is a fundamental element of reality, a fundamental building block of reality, which is nibbana, the unconditioned. That which has no definable characteristics and is not made up of separate objects or separate beings. So these are some ways that the Buddha uses the word dhatu. So then when Sāriputta is asking, so these attitudes and thoughts that arise, where is it that they become diversified? So how is it that they divide up into all these different manifestations of mental activities? And Samiddhi replies, in the elements, which again is kind of a glib answer. It's like saying, well, there's the eye element, ear element, nose element, tongue element, body element, mind element. Okay, there's that. There's earth, water, fire, air, space, consciousness. There's that. There's the conditioned and the unconditioned. There's that. So these are all ways that the mind starts spreading out into different kinds of attitudes and thoughts. And then Sāriputta asks another question. He says, what is their origin? So king samudaya literally means, what do they arise from? And Samiddhi replies, phassa samudaya. They arise from sense contact. So when we have sense contact, then based upon that sense contact, we start to think. We start to form ideas. We start to form attitudes. We start to form intentions based on our sensory experiences. So an example of this is maybe you're sitting in the meditation hall and somebody's in the kitchen baking bread, and the smell of the freshly baked bread enters the meditation hall and enters your nose, and you have the sensory contact. So the sensory contact is just some odor particles entering your nose. But based upon that, then the mind starts to form intentions and thoughts. You start to salivate. You start to think how you want to go and eat whatever smells so lovely. You start to think about whatever it might be. So you start to think about maybe the person who's cooking the bread and what a wonderful person they are. You start to think about how much you want the meditation period to end so you can go in the kitchen and eat the bread. So the mind starts forming all of these attitudes and intentions and thoughts and ideas based upon the sensory contact. So what actually happened? A smell contacted the nose. That's all. But then we tend to build a thought world upon that sensory contact. And then that leads to this diversification and manifestation of all kinds of different thoughts and attitudes and ideas in the mind. So then Sāriputta says, Te pana king samo sarana. And Samosarana literally means running together or flowing together. So Sāriputta is asking, where do they all flow together? Where do they all come together? So it's translated here as, what is their meeting place? Another way of saying that is again, where do they come together? And he replies, Vedana samosarana. Vedana samosarana. So they all come together, or they all flow together, or they all meet in Vedana. So this is the common point. What's the common point? This would be another way of saying this. What's the common point of all of these attitudes and thoughts that appear in the mind? What's the common ground what that they all share? And he's saying it's Vedana. So Vedana is the experience of pleasant, painful, or neutral. So what Samiddhi is pointing to here is that all of these thoughts and manifestations in the mind, all of these attitudes and ideas in the mind, which are arising based upon sense contact, all of them are meeting in the experience of pleasant, painful, neutral. So here Samiddhi is kind of bringing it down to earth again. It's kind of like all of that storytelling in our mind, what's it really about? It's about pursuing pleasure, fleeing pain, and disregarding neutral sensation. So this basic delusional tendency of mind that we have, this basic defiled tendency of mind, these basic instincts and urges to try to pursue what we think is pleasant and flee what we think is painful, and to disregard what we perceive as neither painful nor pleasant. So again, we like to think that we're so smart and so cultured and so advanced, but actually all of that intellect and advancement in culture, it's really just about pursuing pleasure and fleeing pain, just like literally every other living being. And then Sāriputta says, Te pana Samiddhi king pamukha. So what is the foremost of them? So pamukha means towards the front. So what is it, the front? What's the foremost? Like what's the best of all of these mental activities, mental formations, mental processes? What's the best? And Samiddhi replies, samadhi. What's the best mental activity, mental process, mental state? Samadhi. So samadhi is the meditative unification of mind. It's the sharp, bright stillness of mind that we cultivate primarily during meditation practice. So if you're going to direct the mind towards something, this is what to direct it towards. We cultivate this deliberate training of the mind, this training of the mind to do what? To stop doing, to stop swirling around in thoughts, to stop chasing concepts and ideas, to stop all of its unnecessary activities and processes and unify into a bright, alert, awake standstill, what we call samadhi. So Samiddhi is saying, this is the best. You're asking what's the best of all these mental activities? Well, the best one is samadhi, which is the stilling of mental activities. So I'm actually, I kind of imagine kind of a smirk on his face when he's saying these things, because he's giving these very clever, glib replies to everything that Sāriputta is saying. And then Sāriputta says, Te pana king adipateya. So what is their overlord? What is their master? What's the master of all of these mental activities and processes? And Samiddhi replies, sati, mindfulness. Mindfulness is the master. Mindfulness is the chief. So this also is an important statement. It's like, well, okay, everybody has thoughts, opinions, ideas, feelings, sensations. That's all normal. And even the unification of mind, as wonderful as it is, in and of itself is still stillness. So what is it that brings it to the next level? It's the cultivation of a sharp alertness, this precise mindfulness, precise awareness. So this then is what starts to dominate. So adhipateya actually means to dominate. So it has a stronger sense here. It's translated here as ruler, but it has a bit of a stronger sense than that. Like, what is it that dominates everything else in the mind? Mindfulness. Because through clear awareness, clear knowing of everything that appears in the mind, then we're not confused by anything. We're not caught off guard by anything. We can recognize impulses and therefore choose not to be moved by them. And then Sāriputta asks a further question. He asks, he says, Te pana king uttara. So uttara means superior or above, the highest. What goes above all the others? What is supreme? And he replies, panya, wisdom. Wisdom is supreme. Wisdom goes above all else. So this, again, you can see there's a progression that's being laid out here in Samiddhi's responses. Again, cultivating samadhi, great. Cultivating mindfulness with your samadhi, even better. And what goes even above that? It's cultivating wisdom with your samadhi, your mental unification, your stillness of mind, and your mindfulness, your clear awareness. Well, the next thing is wisdom. And in the suttas, the term panya is normally defined as the wisdom which knows the arising and ceasing of phenomena. So in other words, the recognition of impermanence, the recognition that everything is insubstantial and constantly changing, which then naturally leads to the recognition that everything is impersonal and ultimately unsatisfying. So anatta and dukkha, which then naturally leads to the mind letting go and becoming completely free from all suffering and delusion, which in fact is the next question. So Sāriputta says, Te pana king sara. So sara means the heartwood, the essence, the most important thing, the thing that's more valuable and more important than anything else. This is what sara means. It's commonly translated heartwood or essence. And Samiddhi replies, vimutti sara. So he says, vimutti, liberation, freedom. This is the thing that is the most essential, the most important, the most valuable, the most precious. Of all mental activities, processes, formations, the most precious is liberation. And what is liberation? Liberation is liberation from our defilements, liberation from greed, hatred, and delusion, liberation from suffering. This is what we're talking about. And Sāriputta says, Te pana king ogada. What is their culmination? And he replies, amatogada. Its culmination is the deathless, amata, which is another word for nibbana. So the nibbana dhatu, what I mentioned earlier, the nibbana element is called the asankata dhatu. So the unconditioned element, that which is not composed of discrete objects, not composed of separate beings, not composed of components or characteristics. And the nibbana dhatu is also called amata, the deathless, that which is not subject to death. It's also called ajata, the unborn. It is not subject to birth or death. It is not subject to arising and ceasing. It is not subject to coming and going. Such things are not applicable to nibbana. They're not applicable to the ultimate. So Samiddhi is saying that if one is practicing in the way that he's just so cleverly and glibly explained, then that naturally culminates in a direct realization of the deathless, a direct realization of nibbana. And then Sāriputta reiterates what Samiddhi says. So he says, when you are asked what is the basis on which attitudes and thoughts arise in a person, you answered mind and body, and then he goes through the list of everything Samiddhi says. And Sāriputta then says, Sadhu, sadhu, Samiddhi. So good, good, excellent, excellent. He says, it is good that you answered each question, but don't get conceited because of that. So this is the end of the discourse. So Sāriputta again approves of everything that Samiddhi says, but he ends with a note of caution, which is don't form conceit around this. So it's like, yes, you've answered correctly. Yes, you have an intellectual understanding of the Dhamma. That's good. Don't become arrogant on that basis. So this is interesting because it indicates that at the time of this discourse, Samiddhi was not fully awakened. And he still had, and Sāriputta saw in him the risk that Samiddhi could fall into arrogance. This actually is a serious problem that can arise in Dhamma practice. As we cultivate our Dhamma practice, we might start to develop some degree of intellectual understanding of the Dhamma, some degree of experiential wisdom even. We might start to make some progress in developing mindfulness and developing samadhi. We might start to make some progress in developing disenchantment, contentment, equanimity. We might make some progress in developing compassion. And based upon all these wonderful qualities, we might also start developing arrogance. We might start thinking we're better than other people. We might start thinking that we're special. And this is a real risk. Because, of course, the Dhamma is something wonderful. It is something special. It is something that does bring about incredible positive transformations in people. But it's also not ours. It's just a fundamental component of reality. It's not something we created. It's not something we invented. It's just something that we're making use of. It's like a glass of water. I didn't invent water, but I make use of water, and it makes me refreshed, and it brings a sense of brightness and vitality and ease. But if I start claiming that I'm the inventor of water and that I'm really special because I drink water, I mean, that would just be ridiculous. So in the same way, the Dhamma is not something that we can lay claim to because it's just a fundamental aspect of reality. We're just making use of it in order to receive its vitalizing properties, in order to receive its beneficial effects. But it's not something which is ours. It's not something that we can lay claim to or take responsibility for. And furthermore, one of the critical teachings of the Dhamma, in fact, the central teaching of the Dhamma, is the relinquishment of conceit, the relinquishment of self-identity in all its forms. So actually, when we start thinking, oh, I am superior because of my good Dhamma practice, the moment we think that, then our Dhamma practice just weakened. It just got worse. The moment we get conceited because of our Dhamma practice, in that moment, we're now practicing the opposite of Dhamma. So the proper way of practicing Dhamma is with absolute humility. Humility and gratitude, just making use of what's available to us and with a sense of gratitude for all those who have come before us on the path. So that's the end of this discourse. We can respect the discourse with 3 sadhus, and then I'll see if there's any questions. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And hello to the people joining in online. Hello to Maria, Marielle, Sean, Sud, Wasabi, Jody, Ryan, Bhumika, Manal, Julie, Jayanta, Meredith, Victoria, Maria, Mary, Lydia, Sud, and everyone else who's joining in. And I see a couple of questions here. So Sud says, does the Buddha talk about how this birth arises? How does the stream of consciousness arise, and why is it stuck to these 5 khandhas and assumes itself? Yes, in the Samyutta Nikaya, there's a chapter called the Anamataga Samyutta, which deals with exactly this point. So the Anamataga Samyutta, it is a series of discourses which all begin with the same phrase. The Buddha says, this samsara is without discoverable beginning. A first point cannot be found for beings wandering and being reborn in samsara. So this is the answer. So how did birth start? There is no starting point. You cannot find one. That's the Buddha's answer. If you look behind this life, you find another life. If you look behind that one, you find another one. If you look behind that one, you find another one. If you keep looking back and back and back and back, you always just find another life before that one. So this is the nature of reality. There is no starting point to be found. So the sequence is immeasurable, beginningless. But we have the opportunity to attain awakening. So there's no discernible beginning, but there can be a discernible end. And that's what's interesting about Dhamma practice. Then Lydia has a question. Lydia says, can a person have samadhi without mindfulness? Yes, that is called miccha samadhi, wrong samadhi. So the Buddha said there's two kinds of samadhi. Samma samadhi, which is correct samadhi, right samadhi, which is a factor of the path to awakening. And then there's miccha samadhi, wrong samadhi, and that's samadhi without mindfulness. So samadhi without mindfulness is things like a trance state, or when the mind becomes very silent and unified, but it's not aware. So that's miccha samadhi, it's wrong concentration. And that does not lead to awakening, and it doesn't lead to anything useful, in fact. So this actually is a very common problem in meditation circles, as people are practicing meditation and getting into states where the mind becomes very silent and still, but it's also very dull. It lacks sharp, bright awareness. In fact, there's a common experience is people who practice meditation and they enter into a state where the mind basically shuts off for minutes or even hours. And then when they emerge from that state, they think, oh, I just had amazing samadhi. But that's what's called miccha samadhi, wrong samadhi. In fact, there's even many very famous Buddhist teachers who teach this kind of wrong samadhi without realizing that it's directly contrary to how the Buddha himself defined samadhi. So samadhi without mindfulness, there is such a thing. It's just not remotely useful. It's called wrong samadhi. It doesn't lead to the bright, sharp clarity of mind that's necessary to attain awakening. And Sud says, why is it that no matter how much we hear the Dhamma and it makes sense, we fall back into our worldly ways after a little while? Because, Sud, you have to practice. It's not enough just to hear the Dhamma, you need to do it. It's kind of like if you read a book about nutrition and good eating, and then you're like, okay, that was a good book, let's go to McDonald's. And then you wonder why you're not getting anywhere with your health. It's like, well, because you're not actually following the advice in those books, are you? So it's exactly the same with Dhamma practice. We hear the Dhamma and we're like, oh, that's very inspiring, I want to do that. And then we don't. So we have extremely strong habits, and we need to train ourselves to break those habits. We need to deliberately alter our habits, deliberately alter our lifestyle, deliberately alter the way that we approach everything that we do, and in order to shift it from our old habits, our old ways, into new ways which are more in accordance with Dhamma. And this takes a lot of courage and a lot of dedication, and a willingness to change absolutely anything about your life if you realize it's counterproductive to your Dhamma practice. And Visus asks, how can we protect against wrong samadhi in our practice? Through constantly cultivating sharp, bright, intense awareness, especially mindfulness of your body, constant awareness of your body. That's very, very useful. Okay, Moria says, when our minds do create thought worlds and we recognize we've gotten caught up in them, is it best just to ignore them and let them fall away on their own? That is one approach, and if that works, then it works. Generally speaking, once you recognize that you're maintaining a thought construct and you stop maintaining it, then it will fall apart on its own. Thought constructs, generally speaking, require active participation in order to persist. Otherwise, they just disintegrate, usually pretty quickly. So if you recognize, so like you're caught up in a thought world, and then you recognize, oh, just stop maintaining that thought world. Stop building it. And it will crumble. It will fall away. Usually within a matter of seconds. Usually even quicker than that. Usually less than a second, and it's gone. So the reality is that the thought worlds that we build are constantly disintegrating. It's just that we're constantly constructing them at the same time. So if you just stop constructing them, then the disintegration process will take over immediately. It will immediately catch up, and the whole thing will fall apart and vanish. Usually, again, within less than a second, if you actually fully cease participation. And that's the last question. So I think we'll go ahead and conclude it this time. So we'll finish the session with 3 more sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you all next time.